Ever sleep on your neck really wrong? Like maybe it's your shoulder, you like your pillow over part of your shoulder, and your arms underneath the pillow, and then your whole neck is screwed up, and your shoulders all screwed up. If Casper mattresses or My Pillow was a sponsor of the program, this is where I would tell you about them, but they're not. So screw it. Today I'm going to tell you about El Taco Foods. El Taco Foods has been feeding the hungry people of Chicago since 1927. Their most popular item, the pizza puff, became a Chicago staple almost as soon as it hit the very first hot dog stand here in the city. Now, for those that don't know, a pizza puff is premium mozzarella, crumbled Italian sausage, and a signature home-style sauce wrapped in a pillowy yet crispy crust. And that is just the original. They have 14 different flavors, like pulled pork, buffalo chicken, gyro. Those are all really good, by the way. You can learn more about the flavors and where to buy them from their website, www.iltaco.com. Through 4 generations of hard work and a passion for good food, their family-run business now distributes Chicago's Pizza Puff in 38 states across the U.S., so almost everywhere. Check out the website to find out where you can get the good stuff. Again, that's www.iltaco.com. Ignore my neck pains. I keep moving. It really hurts. But anyway, we have a really good show today. A really great guest and a really inspiring guest. We had a really great conversation. Today's guest is Jason Spyres. Jason is first, he's a student at Stanford University out in California, so he's smart and incredibly hardworking. He's an advocate for criminal justice reform and a lot of libertarian policy and politics. He's really involved locally in Illinois, but just across the country. He's really engaged in a lot of different policy issues, but criminal justice reform being his big thing, because that is because Jason spent roughly half of a 30-year prison sentence. He served half of a 30-year prison sentence for cannabis, nonviolent cannabis with intent to sell. And I've known Jason for a few years. I can tell a bit of his story because I know it inside now just from talking to him. But I'd rather just let him do it. He'll tell his own story in his own words in just a second. But the one thing that is for sure is it's really inspiring. He inspires pretty much everyone he meets. He's a really smart guy, really nice guy, and I'm really excited that you're going to get to hear his story and the conversation we had. So here it is, his story in his own words. Jason Spyres.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Kaiser.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
I went out to eat for the sake of this next joke. Joke.
For the deviled cheese and sausage.
Joe Kaiser, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, one of the things I like to explain to people is that if you're not familiar with my story, my name is Jason Spyres. At the age of 19, I was arrested for selling nonviolent cannabis offenses, where I brought cannabis from my mother's house in California to my father's house in Illinois. I knew it was illegal. I chose to do it anyways, but I made a dumb decision. I ended up getting 30 years in prison for it. I think it was kind of extreme. I leave it to other people to make their decision on if that's right or not. I also received over $200,000 in fines at the time, and I just didn't realize it, because when you're given a sentence that's longer than the number of years you've been alive, you kind of don't listen to anything after that. So I didn't hear that the fines were over $200,000, And so when I went to prison, I had a series of moments that made me change my thinking and understand that I wanted more for myself. A tree fell in a spot that I'd usually stand, and it gave me this realization of that tree could have hit me and I could have died. I'm not saying it would have, but it just made me realize that possibility existed. So it made me contemplate my life and like what I would be known for. And at that point, I would have been known for, I'm using air quotes, for being good. And I use air quotes here because I got caught, so I obviously wasn't that good at moving a plant from one state to another state. And like when I was growing up in school, I was always regarded as smart, but like my mother smoked pot. My dad did a lot of harder drugs. Then my mother moved into a meth habit, and they always loved me, but they just weren't roles in their life to make the best decisions as parents. And so I was raised in a house where hard drugs being around me wasn't surprising, where selling pot wasn't like, oh my God, you're an evil person. And so, but I had this realization in prison of like, even though I didn't morally think I was a bad person for selling pot, I was disappointed with the contribution that I was making to society. And I wanted to make more. And I wanted to actually be regarded as a net positive to society. I wanted to contribute to it and not just be a thorn in its side. Because whether you agree or disagree with the illegality of cannabis, getting arrested for it and going to prison made me be a burden to the taxpayers and onto the system. And I didn't want to just be a burden to society. So I came along this path that I wanted to do more, but I wasn't exactly sure what it was I wanted to do. But I knew whatever it is I wanted to do, having a higher level of education would help me obtain that goal when I figured it out. So I was in prison, so I went over to the library. I got my hands on molecular chemistry textbook. It was 1,200 pages with 1,100 page workbook. It was 20, 30 years old, but chemistry doesn't change overnight, so it was still relevant information. And I worked that book, every single page, every single question, every single day until I got through the whole thing. It took me 6.5 months. I wrote colleges asking for any old textbooks they have on engineering subjects, and I broke down physics, I broke down molecular chemistry, I broke down organic chemistry, I did calculus. At one point, my mother, who was now clean and sober, got online and printed me out Khan Academy transcripts for math. And I literally read those transcripts, and how like he made simple algebra sound so simple gave me the confidence to move past algebra and try to take on calculus and things. And so I did all this because I knew when I got out that I wanted to go to college. And I remembered at one point that I decided that I wanted to do engineering. I remember a correctional officer came up to me and asked me, like what my plans were. And I said, I don't know, maybe Harvard, Stanford, University of Illinois, who knows? And he kind of laughed at me. Not laughed at me like, how dare you, but laughed at me like, yeah, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's like the lofty goal, yeah.
Yeah, and like I kind of sat there and I looked around the prison day room and I seen other guys there playing cards, and another guy in the corner was studying for his GED. And I said, in my head, I'm thinking, I'm arrogant enough that it doesn't bother me that he thinks that's funny. I'm still going to try, I said, but I don't know if everyone else around me is arrogant enough to laugh off his joke. And I don't want people to think that they can't go achieve their own lofty goals, be that opening a mechanic shop, starting a horticulture business, or whatever. So it's kind of like that, maybe even just being a good dad to their kids, because to some guys, that's a challenge and they want to try and do it. So I kind of took it in my head as like a challenge, as like, okay, well, now I'm going to definitely try to go to a school like that because I want to accomplish that wow factor to help break down that never mentality of that'll never happen. Because I knew it was hard, but I never believed it wasn't possible. Just like that tree didn't land on me, but it made me realize there's possibility. There was a universe where that could have happened. So when I get towards the end of my sentence, I was fortunate enough to get to a work release program where I was able to get out, and it's where they teach you valuable skills like how to get up at 6 a.m. when you're tired and go to work anyways. It's a good skill to have. And while I was there, first week there, I walked into my counselor's office and I said, I have 2 goals. And he's like, okay, let's hear your 2 goals. I said, my first goal is to do whatever it takes to make you happy. He's like, I like your first goal. You really are kind of smart. Your first goal is good. Let's hear your second goal. And I said, I want to be an engineer. And he was kind of like, okay. Like he didn't understand. Like he's like, so what's this have to do with the price of tea in China? Why are you telling me? Right. And I was like, it says in your rule book that I can go to college. He's like, this is a work release center, not a school release center. I said, it says in your workbook I can go. I said, but my first rule is to make you happy. So how do I make these 2 rules work? And he's like, get a job, work 40 hours a week, bring home 2-3 checks, and then we'll talk about if you still want to go to school or not. How about that? I said, works for me. I went out and I got a job as a dishwasher at Kenny's West Side Pub. And I was telling my boss, Sean Kinney, about how I wanted to go to school and be an engineer. And he said, hey, I'm all for it. I'm for you guys better in your life. When you guys get out of the work release center, I want you to have jobs so good enough that you don't want to work for me, And so I worked for about 6 weeks. I got promoted to be the manager. And I went to Sean and I said, hey, I got a deal for you because I'm getting ready to go to school. And he's like, okay, well, what's your deal? I said, if you let school come first, you'll come second. And he's like, you need to learn better negotiation tactics.
Right.
That's not a good deal. I'm like, hold on. You're not understanding what I'm saying. In the work release program, after you're there and you're doing the right thing, you get to a point where you can get 4-hour passes to go out on dates or go bowling. You can go home every other weekend to spend time with your family, as long as you keep a job and do the right thing. And I told him, no, the deal I'm making you is if you let college come first, you'll come second, which means I will come third.
Right. Your social life, your family, anything like that.
So I won't go on dates. I won't go home to see my grandparents on the weekends. It will be school. And if it is not school, it will be your business. I will sweat, bleed, and work for your business as long as I can accommodate it around me going to school for engineering. He said, deal. So I go back to my counselor and said, you told me to get a job. You told me to work 40 hours a week for 2-3 weeks, and we talk about school. I've been working 70 hours a week for 6 weeks. I'm ready to talk about school. He said, you're working 70 hours a week. How are you going to handle school? I said, hey, I made my first promise to you work. I did what you said make you happy. Trust me on my second one about wanting to be an engineer. He said, all right, you can sign up for one class. I'm like, hold on. I got to work this around my school schedule. What if I get out there and one class that's 5 units is at the time that I got to be at work? But there's 2 classes that are 2 units apiece, and they work with my schedule. I can take one 5-unit class, but I couldn't take 2 2-unit classes. He's just like, go sign up for school and don't do nothing stupid. So I go out to the community college, full-time engineering courses, full labs, everything, like 15 units, all of it. But I'd spent all the time when I was locked up studying molecular chemistry, studying organic chemistry, studying physics. So I already had a pretty good grasp on a lot of the introductory classes. So I had a plan. I wasn't just being stupid. And then for the next 17 months, I worked anywhere from 55 to 70 hours a week. I became the operations manager over multiple locations for Kenny's West Side Pub, their auxiliary locations in Peoria, Illinois. And I was going to school full-time hours for engineering and holding a 4.0 GPA. And in that time, it's another long story, I became the first ever student in my position to be admitted in the Phi Theta Kappa. I applied. They wouldn't let me in due to my conviction. I wrote a thing to the bylaws committee saying, I don't think that, I'm really proud of what you guys are trying to do. And I would really wish that you guys would honor my academic performance today. And I've moved past my past, and I wish you'd allow me to do so too. Because just because I sold cannabis 17 years ago, that shouldn't reflect on the worthy and honor of my academic performance today. And they said, you know what, you're right. And they changed their bylaws, and I was the first ever admitted to Phi Theta Kappa. So when I got out on parole, I was preparing to transfer, and I did. I transferred to Harvard. I transferred to Stanford. Or I applied to transfer to Harvard, Stanford, Dartmouth, Northwestern, all these different places, and the University of Illinois. And what happened is the University of Illinois, one day I get an email saying that we're going to put you on academic probation. I'm like, wait a minute, did I get in? How do you get on academic probation if you didn't get in? And then I get the email an hour later saying that I'd gotten in. The academic probation department emailed me before the admissions decision had even actually been released. So it was just like an hour timing difference. And I was like, wait a minute, why am I going on academic probation? So I called a guy up to learn and read about the policy. And the guy was like, oh yeah, you said that you had a felony conviction. He's like, there's one of 3 ways we handle if you have a felony conviction. I'm like, Okay, what's that? And he's like, well, we can either admit you on academic probation, we can deny you, or we can just admit you outright with no restrictions. I'm like, can you explain to me when you would admit somebody outright with no restrictions and when you would deny them? And he said, I think denial would be like if you still had a pending case for like, a sex abuse case or a murder. We don't even know if you're going to be available. You might be incarcerated, so we might deny you outright. He said, but like, let's say you had a DUI when you were 21. You got a DUI. You made a mistake. You got probation. You went and did what you had to do. You got it behind you. You're now 24. 3 years has passed. You've grown from your mistake. We see no reason to hold that over your head. So we usually just admit you outright. And I said, have you looked at my file? He's like, no. I said, okay, well, I want you to do me a favor. I said, will you please look at my file? He's like, well, just tell me the situation. I said, I sold pot 17 years ago. and I said, you just told me if I had a DUI 3 years ago.
Right, 24, 21 to 24, yeah. And this is a jump of what? You were 19 and now you're what, 35, 36?
Time I was 36. I'm 38 now. So at the time I was 36.
Even if you didn't go to prison from 19 to 36, you're definitely a different person. Like anybody.
I try to tell people this, like, forget the fact that I was in prison for as long as I was. I can't control the length of the sentence that I was given. But if you look at what I did at the age of 19, I hope anybody would say, yes, someone at the age of 19 is not going to look at a situation and assess the situation the same way when they're 35.
Yes.
When they're in their mid-30s. You know what I mean? So, like, especially when you start to look at the activities they're doing leading up to it, which is where, like, I'm getting a 4.0 GPA. I became an operations manager. I'm now hiring other people at the Berkeley Center I was in. And I got off parole early because my parole officer, I think it's because he knew I was trying to apply to Stanford and Harvard and all these places, and he thought I might get in. He didn't want to do the paperwork to transfer my parole. But, like, he seen that I was doing the right thing, and so he put me in to get me off parole early. His whole argument is this guy is basically already demonstrating all the rehabilitative factors we're supposed to try and instill in people. Let's let him off. And so while I'm talking to the guy, he pulls up my file, and I could tell at this point the guy is, like, on my side, but he's just the poor Joe who had to answer the phone and now has to defend this ridiculous policy decision. And he's like, here's the deal. I think because you checked the box saying you're on parole, that's why you're probably going on academic probation. I said, oh, I got good news for you. I'm off parole already. I haven't even started your class. So will that fix it? He's like, unfortunately, no. Because once the decision's made, it's made. I said, what about this? What if I come to your school, I do everything right, I get better than a 3.5, almost all A's, A minuses. I don't commit any infractions the entire time. The day I go to graduate, that morning, you take me off academic probation, get rid of the file as if it never even happened. The day I go to graduate, so there's no longer a presence. He's like, yeah, we can't do that. And I'm like, here's what's upsetting me. I sold cannabis, so I can understand a security need. I can understand something to keep your school more safe. I've never cheated on a test. I do not understand why I'm going on
academic probation. Yeah.
That's the part. He's like, well, if you don't do anything wrong, it's not going to make a difference. You shouldn't care. And I said, I'm not going to do anything wrong, but it is going to make a difference. And that's what he said. I'll tell you what, you tell me how it'll make a difference and we'll continue this conversation. And I'm thinking to myself on the phone, like, what are you going to do? Hang up on me? I said, okay, I appreciate your time. So here's how it'll affect me. I'm not on academic probation now because I've never done anything wrong on a test. But if I accept admission to U of I now go on academic probation. And then when I go to apply to grad school, if I want to get a master's degree, on my application, they're going to ask, have you ever been on academic probation? And I'm now going to have to check that box, yes, despite never having done anything to merit having my academics questioned.
And they're just going to look at the box. It's not going to lead to, oh, why did you check this box? And you have
And
the
then that's what
conversation.
he said. He said, oh, that's true, but we can write you a letter and we could explain it. And I said, yeah, you probably could, but I also have to explain serving 15 years in prison for cannabis.
Yep.
And when you have 20 minutes to review my graduate application, it sucks that 15 minutes of it's going to be eaten up explaining things that shouldn't have had to have been checked in the first place.
Yeah.
And I could tell like he was on my side, but there was just nothing he could do for me about it.
Just administratively, the rules. Yeah.
But then I get a response from Stanford, and Stanford placed me on the wait list. And there's a whole nother story behind that. I tracked down my admissions officer in Chicago and kind of made it clear that I really, really, really wanted to be at Stanford. And because when I was a kid, I have cerebral palsy. So when I was a kid, I went to Stanford Children's Hospital, and they're part of the reason I'm walking today. So like, it wasn't just I want to go to Stanford because they're this big name. Like they're actually responsible for my ability to walk the way that I can. And I got off the wait list. They took me off the wait list, and I got admitted to Stanford. And one of the things I liked, I got Dean Shaw of Stanford. He called me up, and he heard about what happened with the University of Illinois. And he didn't say nothing negative about him, but I think his sentence was referring to them when he said, Jason, we want you to come to Stanford, and we want you to come to a place that's going to admit you for the person you are today and not hold your 19-year-old mistakes over your shoulder for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And they also see like the value in your mentality and the way you were able to change is I mean, that's huge. That's a really impressive thing. They see that value. They see the insight that you have, whereas Illinois is following some archaic set of rules that they don't feel like they can change.
Well, that's the problem is when you get to state universities, a lot of times you got a lot of bureaucratic rules and policies and things like that that just don't make sense. Like that poor guy on the phone that was trying to explain to me why I'm on academic probation. And it's for cannabis from 17 years ago. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. But when you get bureaucracy out of the way, a lot of times you can just cut through a lot of that and make better decisions. But one of the things Stanford said is a lot of their transfers, like 3,000 people applied to transfer and only 24 got in. So I was very lucky to get in. And I got a full financial aid package. Like I'm not paying a penny in tuition. So, but one of the things that I tell people is Stanford values resilience. Like the 24 people that got in, I've met them. We've all been around the block. We've all had our fair share. And I like to explain it to this. Like Stanford is like, imagine you're at Six Flags. You got to be this tall to ride this ride. You got to be this smart to get in. You don't got to be a rocket scientist. They just want to know that can you handle the challenge of the school? After that, they want to know about your personal qualities. Right. They want to know about your resilience, about your ability to overcome challenges. And they told me, like, they said that what you did is you made the most of the tools you had been given. And that's what we want, because we figure if we give you better tools, the sky's the limit as to what you can do now. Yeah. So now I'm currently at Stanford. I've actually became the new student orientation transfer coordinator for Stanford. I help oversee a lot of the transfer applicants as they come into the school. That's actually my role at Stanford now. And I'm currently majoring in computer science with an emphasis in artificial intelligence. So.
It's all awesome. And I think your story about going to college and being admitted to college, I think is a good anecdote for the whole argument about cannabis reform and criminal justice in general, because you had, just using these two schools as anecdotes, you had one telling you that we can't get over the mistake that you made, and then another seeing the hard work that you put in. Your mentality of what I think is impressive is saying, like, I want to try to go to Harvard, Stanford, U of I, because even if you came up just short, putting in that effort means you're going to be going places, and that's why I think that mentality is impressive. So you had one school that's looking at the change you made and showing that you're ready to make a positive impact on your community, on society. And that's kind of the criminal justice reform and the cannabis reform arguments in a nutshell, is you have people that aren't willing to look back and change past mistakes, that are just saying like, that's you forever. And then you have people that are saying like, people change, people are complicated, that we need to look ahead and be more progressive on these things. And that's the argument nationwide.
Yeah. I like to think that it's not even progressive. I just like to think that it's not regressive.
Yeah,
We get
sure.
to the point where we allow people to stand on their merits today for the person they are now, as opposed to always holding them accountable for something that they did in their past, which they no longer relate to. There's so many people who have moved past their past, and if you look at who they are today, and even in the last 5 years, 10 years, who they are is not representative of something that happened. And to me, it's not progressive to say give that person another chance. It's just anti-regressive.
Yeah.
We're saying, okay, we're going to stop holding it against you. It's like taxes. If you made $250,000 in 2009, you don't pay the same marginal tax rate in 2020 for what you made in 2009. Like,
Right.
you know, I mean, you're taxed for what you did this year. I think we should look at that a lot of times in our policies.
Right.
One of the things I like to say is that when I got into Stanford, when that guy found it funny that I would applied for that, a lot of people go, "Hi, you proved him wrong. Good for you." And I'm like, "Yeah, but we're not talking about how Dartmouth denied me, Northwestern denied me, Harvard denied me." Which, in retrospect, I'm not really too mad about that one. You know, and a lot of other good schools denied me. But the whole point of this is we don't talk about that. We talk
Right.
about how Stanford accepted me.
Right.
And my point is that when you have these goals and these ambitions and things you want to do moving forward, make a realistic plan, understand the work you got to do to make it happen, and then don't worry about the things that go wrong. Because all
Absolutely.
you need is for one of them to go right, and no one talks about the things that go wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay? Obama lost election to Bobby Rush. Not
Yeah.
many people talk about that.
Right.
Because they call him President Obama. Like, you know, like it's, you know, a lot of things. And so one of the things that I'm really head on is when I think back about that, like a lot of people tell me that I've inspired them. Not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just trying to explain it is I encounter a lot of people that I was locked up with and people that had known me. And they tell me how it's inspiring that they see everything I went to go do. One guy said, "I remember looking at you in the day room with all them textbooks out and had papers all over the table. And I was like, look at this guy. He thinks he's smart." And he said, now I go, look at what he did. The guy was smart, you know? And I'm like, well, and anybody in there, I hope they can do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know,
People don't think about the work that goes into well, even beyond just in getting out of prison, anything, any like one major accomplishment. One, you don't look at the failures that it took to get there. And two, you don't look at the hours and hours you put in working long weeks.
7 hours a day, every single day,
Then
every
school
single question. Yeah, like I did it for years. And like right now, Stanford's killing me, bud. Like they're no joke. They live up to the hype in every which way. I used to think I was a smart person. Now I just, you know, I try. So, but one of the ways that I've grown is when I reflect back to that conversation, why when I wanted to instill hope in other people that were incarcerated with me, I realized that I don't think that officer laughed at me because it was impossible for me. I think he laughed at me because it was impossible for him.
Mm.
Because in his head, he looked at it as he wasn't an inmate, and he didn't see that as a possibility for himself or even for his own children.
Yeah. And if it's
Because
not
it
possible
wasn't possible for him, he reflected that onto me. And I'm not saying nothing bad about it. What I'm saying is, to that officer and people like him, I also like to be representative of what they could do for them. Because if I could do it and I was an inmate, if they're ready to put in the work, they could do it too.
Yeah. Like that's a totally human bias to have that reaction that he had of like, oh, it wasn't possible for me. And then he looks at you and you were dealt a tougher hand than he was. So there's no way that you could do it, you know? So it's just a totally normal bias.
Self-inflicted hand, but if anything, I was in the midst of a more unlikely situation for it.
Yeah, totally. I think so. I'm curious your perspective on this. Do people like a university or an employer, if they see a box checked that you have a criminal record, or they are aware of somebody having a criminal record, but they don't know you personally, they don't know your face, they haven't talked to you, they don't know your story, it seems like it'd be easier just to say no. But when you have conversations with people who get to know you and get to know Jason, have you noticed any kind of self-reflection on people's views on either cannabis or just criminal justice in general, where because they know you, that causes them to have a self-reflection on stuff?
I met Doug Kimmelman. He manages a hedge fund. He's involved in energy investing. He's a billionaire, right? And I met him at Stanford, and we're sitting there talking. And I walked up and I started talking to him, and he's like, "Oh wow, are you like a research assistant here or something?" I'm like, "No, I'm a student. I'm just old." He's like, "Oh, so a graduate?" I said, "No, I'm an undergrad. So let me correct that. I'm just a really old undergrad." He's like, "Oh," and I said, "I just transferred here last year." He said, "You're a transfer?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What's your story?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Nobody transfers to Stanford without a story. What's your story?" And so I took a step back and I was like, "You've always been open about who you are. Just go for it." And I told him, I said, "Well, when I was 19, I got arrested for trafficking cannabis." And then I was literally about to say, "But I made a mistake and I'm here now." And right as I go to say it, he snapped his fingers and pointed at me and said, "But you're here now." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "And that's all that matters. What you're doing today, you're here now. You're a Stanford student. That's all that matters." And my point with that discussion is I've realized that it's hard for people when they see a box checked on an application to assess that as the person they're trying to hire. But like, I'm a libertarian. I bleed gold. So I believe everybody has the right to make certain distinctions that's best for their business. But I will say that a lot of times you're going to miss out on a lot of good talent because you're going to look at this classifier, which ties into another subject that I've been working on, and make a wrong prediction based on something that's not appropriate. And one of the things I say about that is when I was the hiring manager at Goldie's, I was the hiring manager. The name of the place is Goldie's. The other location was Cherry's. I didn't really. It was a lower level job. I didn't really ask if they had a criminal conviction because I cared more about like when the person walked in the door, how did they dress? Did they show up at the time that I asked them to show up? How was their communication skills with me? And I really believe that a private business should have the right to ask the question if they want to about, are you convicted of a felony conviction? However, I believe a private business should find it in their interest to not ask that question.
Sure.
And then after you get through a certain stage, ask if it's relevant to the job.
Yeah.
For example, if you're going to be an accountant, asking do you have any prior larceny or embezzlement charges might be relevant. But like if you're interviewing me and like let's say I'm going for software programming where I'm literally just helping like Tableau do their data stuff, I don't understand how asking me about a drug that you don't even drug test for is relevant to the job. You know, like it doesn't. I also like to flip it around way. I've seen firsthand the inappropriate amount of importance people put on these big name schools like Stanford and Harvard and everything like that. And while it can be a good screening procedure to see how motivated a person is, the same way that you get a benefit from that big name that's not necessarily relevant to the job you're doing, you shouldn't be ascribing a detriment to a conviction that's not relevant to the job you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And if you're going to ask, if a private business is going to ask the question to begin with, at least take a holistic approach to it. That I think some people's minds just might shut off based off the answer. And that's just not fair to either party. It's not fair to the applicant. And it's not fair to the business either, because you might be losing out on talent that would be a great fit for your business, but you just completely shut off based on this one question. That's kind of what, just going back to the example, is kind of the U of I example. It's like you're limiting somebody's potential based on one thing, and people are far more complicated than that.
Today contain us with another mindless motivational moment. We have to change our mindsets from using the phrase "I got to" "I get to." Okay? No more "I gotta get up in the morning." I get to get up in the morning. No more "I gotta go to work." I get to go to work. Okay? No more "I gotta go to the dentist and get 2 root canals." I get to go to the dentist and get 2 root canals. No more "I got to call my dad and tell him to refill my trust fund." Okay? I get to call my dad and have that awkward conversation for him to make me feel bad and refill my trust fund. No more "I gotta fire my admin, Stacy, I get to fire my admin, Stacy. Okay? Go from that negative to the positive mindset and you will win the day. All right.
So politics is obviously a lagging indicator of how people's views have evolved on these issues and on any issues, because people's mindsets in the last 5 to 10 years at least have really come a long way on cannabis specifically, to the point where it's legal in several states across the country. You might have it legal nationally at any point. But what is your view on where the politics is on it versus how people, just everyday people, view the issue?
I don't believe on the national stage that our our politics are representative of our people's views. And what I mean by that is, like I said, I put my biasness out there. I lean libertarian, but I'm not trying to critique other parties just to be contrarian. I'm really disappointed that both of our major party candidates are not for the legalization of cannabis, because I believe it's a safe assessment when I believe it's something like 37 states have some form of legalization of cannabis, be it even if it's just medical. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, point where now if you held a constitutional convention, that's enough states to pass an amendment. And I really think that I wish our national politicians would be more representative of legalizing cannabis. Trump, I heard him say something about leave it to the states. I guess I can kind of understand that, but I was really kind of disappointed that the Democrats put up a candidate that is not in favor of legalization. To me,
Especially when in their primary they had plenty of candidates that were too. Like they picked one of the few that wasn't.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard was in favor of legalization. Bernie Sanders was in favor of legalization. And I try to make this argument, and sometimes I wonder if Joe Biden doesn't comprehend it. I mean it in the most respectful way, is that you can be anti-prohibition and understand the evils and ills of having an illegal cannabis market without being pro-advocate use of cannabis. I don't smoke pot. I never have. I've smoked pot a handful of times, but I've never been like a pot smoker.
Right.
But I'm going to tell you, as a convicted drug trafficker, the illegal market is not doing anybody any good. And one of the things Bill Maher said a long time ago that made a lot of sense, he said, you want to know why cannabis ain't legal yet? And I think he said this in the late 90s. He said, because everybody can get it. He said, if there was a problem, if it was hard to get, the people would be mad. And then the politicians would be like, we're going to solve this problem. But everybody can get it. So it's kind of muted the uproar to make it, eligible to get. But I argue all the time, you don't have to be against legalization to be against the use of cannabis. You can say that it's okay that Budweiser is legal, but I still don't want to come home and find my kid wasted on the couch.
Exactly.
That's fine. There's nothing contradictory about that. But speaking as a convicted drug trafficker, I'm telling you right now, having it illegal is not doing anything good for society. Any kind of reduction in use you think you might be creating is not there, because when I was in high school, on my 18th birthday, I decided to throw a party, and this was 20 years ago, and I wanted to get 2 kegs of beer. I had pounds of marijuana. I would sell them to you. And on a phone call, I could get ounces of other hardcore substances within 15 minutes on a front. I spent 3 days tracking down people to try and get 2 kegs of beer. And it almost didn't happen. And this was as a drug dealer. If you want to reduce use, you legalize it, because when people have a license and can have their shop shut down, they're more worried about a minor not getting it than someone who has no regulation and no license and is doing it in the black market.
It's the regulation both of the laws that would exist and just the self-regulation from the marketplace of companies wouldn't want minors to get their hand on it. They wouldn't want it to be abused. So there'd be a self-regulation on top of it. And I think this argument connects with a lot more people. It's seemingly more and more people. You saw people get frustrated with contradictions. Like in 2016, Jeb Bush had it come to light that he smoked marijuana when he was younger, but because the whole argument is because he came from a privileged family, like that nothing bad is going to happen to him. He's never at risk of something bad happening to him. Kamala Harris admitted to smoking marijuana and has locked up plenty of people for smoking or selling marijuana too. And the contradictions, it's almost like those contradictions that people notice more are going to move the ball forward toward legalization, because it's just becoming clearer and clearer how unfairly the laws are applied and how silly it is to continue to keep people punished for them when everyone else is evolving on it.
It gets even worse than that for me. Like, I was trying to talk to somebody one time, and I was trying to tell them that I first started selling cannabis because I was broke, and I liked the idea of, being the man and having friends, and pot did that. But I would have never, ever, ever started selling any other harder drugs, because at the time I was able to create this mental construct where I wasn't hurting anybody. I wasn't doing anything wrong, because cannabis might be illegal, but it wasn't morally wrong. I made that distinction. Just like interracial marriage was once illegal in our country, and I think everybody will agree today that that's not morally wrong, right? So, but what happened was, as I became a drug dealer, and I was surrounded by other people who sold other drugs and did other crimes, like other crimes, and I found myself being surrounded with a class of people that didn't have the same respect for morality of laws as I did. Like, I wouldn't rob you. I'm not going to steal from you. I didn't want to carry illegal guns, and I would never stick a gun in your face to try and get something from you. But what happens is because cannabis was illegal, people always want to talk about the gateway. The gateway drug is not the use of cannabis. The gateway drug is having it illegal desensitizes us to the other laws. And it makes it when we begin to question the legitimacy of the other laws because we're breaking this law and it's fine. And so I try to tell people, if you legalize cannabis, it's kind of like if you look at drinking today. There's plenty of people who drink alcohol but will never move on to doing cocaine or something like that because that's illegal. But what happened was when cannabis is illegal, you get people who do cannabis and then they think, oh, well, that's illegal and that's not so bad. And once again, my libertarian perspective, I'm anti-prohibition when it comes to all things. But I'm just talking from a pragmatic perspective. If you want people to respect the dangerousness of a substance or something like that, don't take a substance that doesn't have that many dangers and make it illegal. Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing is you're desensitizing them to your words. When you tell me this thing is going to hurt you, and then I pick that thing up and I throw it up and I hit it against my chest and I do all kinds of things and I never once get hurt. And all my friends do it and they never once get hurt. They just get lazy and sit on the couch. And then you hold this other thing up and say, this thing will hurt you. I now don't believe you. I now am more likely to do the thing that can hurt me because you weren't honest about the first thing.
Absolutely. It's like they gave it a reputation, and that's the actual problem. It's like
they desensitized my ability to assess their legitimacy.
Yeah. Because like cigarettes are legal. You can go pick up a pack of cigarettes from the gas station right now, and there's no fear that's going to lead to cocaine or anything violent because it's that what you just explained, that desensitizing. Like, cigarettes are just part of our life. Alcohol is just part of our life. They're legal. You can acquire them, and I don't feel like I'm at any risk of something horrible. I mean, they're not good for you, but anything horrible happening to me because of that. I think you really nailed it right there.
Yeah. It's like I said, and keep in mind, as a drug dealer at the age of 18 who had multiple pounds of pot and could obtain almost any other drug he wanted on a phone call, it took me 3 days to get 2 kegs of beer.
Right.
And I ended up paying twice what they cost at the store. Like, so if you want to make it hard to get, legalize it.
Right. Well, I'm with you on the major candidates, and nationally the discourse on the issue is not very encouraging. But I don't want people to kind of feel like there's no hope for reform or kind of get pessimistic about it. What things do you think can actually move the ball forward quicker than worrying about the presidential election or national elections? What things can actually happen soon?
Well, I approach this from a two-pronged approach because I hate sounding like a shill for a particular party because I'm not. But I try to tell people if you really want to make a difference, right, then vote for the candidate that actually has the principles that you want. And the argument that I make for that is everybody always worries about an election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Well, we have an electoral college system. If you live in Illinois, California, New York, Biden's going to win. Your vote is not going to change that. If you live in Georgia and Alabama, if you're not in a swing state, you know what I mean? The electoral college is going to go for the candidate it's going to go for. If you want to make a point, do a protest vote for a third party. And I don't care if it's the Green Party for Howie Hawkins. I'm a libertarian. Our vote for Joe Jorgensen. But that sends a message to DC if a third party gets established, because now they actually got to acknowledge that this is a legit party, and they get on a debate stage, and then you start hearing the ideas and the premises get contrasted. And if anybody knows how to move with public polls, it's politicians.
Mhm.
Let a public poll reflect 5% for libertarians and see how quick their positions all of a sudden get accumulated into the other two. From 1971, the Libertarian Party said the way government is not allowing homosexuals to get married was wrong. They said incarcerating people for a plant is wrong. And you've seen over time, the parties went with those principles. But if you don't want to vote for a third party candidate, the things you can do to also move the needle is you can actually pick up the phone and call your local representatives and tell them, hey, I support the legalization of cannabis, or hey, I support criminal justice reform. If you're a Democrat and you really want to make a point, call up a Democratic leader and say, you know what, when Trump passed that First Step Act, I'm glad to see he embraced that. You see how quick the Democratic Party is going to be like, we're all for that. And you can be like, oh, so you support legalization. You know what I mean? Like, you get them to take on the position of the other party that you do like.
Yeah.
And if you're a Republican, you know, there's plenty of things you can do when you call up a Democrat to say something you like that the Democratic Party did and you're talking to a Republican legislator. The thing is right now, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, I remember he was in Jay Leno in the 1990s. And Jay Leno asked him, what's the biggest joke behind closed doors? Like, what do politicians really not care about behind closed doors? He said, oh, legalization of cannabis. He said, everybody thinks it should be legal. The thing is both sides are just afraid to be the first one to say it, right? So if voters would call up the representatives and say, hey, I wish you would say it, you're not really convincing them of the principle, because a lot of times they already believe what you think. They're just waiting to have the political courage to say it. And nothing does that better than polls. Nothing does that better than constituents calling them up and saying something. I believe it was HBO in the late 80s, early 90s had a cartoon called Spawn. And if I remember correctly, it was a popular cartoon, and they got 6 calls. 6. Saying that they didn't like the show and it was inappropriate. And they pulled the show. And if I remember correctly, they pulled it because they said each call to them represented 10,000 people that felt the same way. So 6 people got a popular show pulled off a channel. If you call your congressman, you'd be amazed what it can change. I called Jason Barrickman during the cannabis bill, and I talked to his office, and I said, I met this guy. I told him my story, and he said, I'm really proud of everything you're doing, and if I can support you in any way, I'm all for it. I like to see the way you're moving forward. And I said, so I would like to remind him what this bill could do for the other people that are like me and could move forward as well. Now, I'm not saying that changed his mind. He had other issues he was worried about. But I called the office and I talked to him, and I talked to his rep. And the next day I called, his rep said, Jason, I already talked to him. I want to let you know he's on the floor today. He left here saying he's going to vote for it. I believe he's even going to co-sponsor it. And so what I mean is when you call the office, it makes an impact. It really does.
Yeah. Because what are these people motivated by? It's being reelected. It's being elected to the next office. Those are the things that actually motivate a lot of politicians, sadly, in a lot of senses. So putting that...
And one of the things that I like to say is when I was in prison, I was a Class X offender. What that did is it rendered me legally heinous and exempted me from being able to get good time programs. So there was literally people convicted of a second-degree murder that were considered less heinous than me because I'd sold cannabis and could receive good time credits that I could not. And when I was locked up, I'd write all the state legislators about it and barely ever get any response. Michael Frerichs did respond to me. That's our state treasurer. I'll give him a shout out. He wrote me back twice. I was actually impressed. But what I found is that when I actually met these people in person and they shook my hand and I told them, they're like, wait a minute, Class X does what? And I explained it to them. Now Class X's are eligible for good time in IDOC. So someone who's locked up, like my buddy Shane Crutchfield, doing 40 years for nonviolent nonviolent cocaine offenses, is now earning good time for pursuing a GED and doing things that statistically lower his recidivism rate. This is something he might not have had I not met with legislators and explained what a Class X actually means. The thing is we expect our politicians to be these experts that understand everything, that know the back of every single bill, and they don't. There's some who want to do the right thing, but you cannot expect them. Right now, if you were to ask me about the regulations on fishing water in southern Illinois and how high the calcium rate should be, I'd be like, I don't know. They're like, well, here's the bill. We're voting on it in 15 minutes. But if someone had called my office and said, here's what I think about it, and here's what I hope you would consider, I would prioritize that conversation and take it into my decision process. One of the things that I've been working on lately is Ginny Ives. I've been trying to explain to her how cannabis affected me and why she should support legalizing it. And she's interacted with me on Facebook a little bit. I'm not saying I could change her decision, but her being aware that there are people who are getting deemed legally heinous for cannabis might reflect in her decisions in the future.
Right.
So you need to call up your politicians and help educate them.
Exactly.
And don't turn around and get mad that we have lobbyists, because a lot of times the lobbyists are people that's really just trying to explain the bill to the people. Yes, they're trying to sway them to vote a certain way, but I do the same thing. I'm just not getting paid for it. You can be an individual lobbyist by simply calling you don't have to make big political contributions. A phone call can make an impression.
Right. I like what you said about we usually assume that they're experts and everything, because they're really not. They're more similar to us than we in terms of their knowledge on all these issues than we realize. And they might not only not be super knowledgeable on an issue, but not be super passionate about an issue. So if you can come to them, apply a little pressure and tell your story or just talk to them about an issue, anybody out there, you might not only inform them on something, but you might help build their opinion on it.
Well, like Erica Harold, she was running for the Attorney General in 2018. She was a Republican candidate. I got a hold of her. I talked to her. I met her, and I asked her. I asked all politicians this point blank. I said, assume what I'm saying is true, that I was 19 and it's nonviolent for cannabis. You're not on the hook if I'm lying to you. Assume what I'm saying is true. Do you agree that I should have $268,000 in debt for cannabis when I sold when I was 19? I want a yes or a no. Any other thing, you're not answering my question. And Erica Harold said, no, I definitely don't support that. And what my point is she wasn't even aware or knowledgeable that things like that was happening. So a lot of these politicians, be them Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, you're anti-nemesis party. A lot of times it's not that they're against you as much as they're just not informed of what's going on. And you can't blame them unless you can tell me what the calcium rate is in Southern Illinois' River District. If you don't know that, then you can't blame a politician for not knowing every single strange fact as well.
Right. And then also this is the thing I like about the fact that you're so engaged politically is you put a face to all this for a lot of people, like Erica Harold, whoever, meeting you and saying this is a real person who's contributing to society, is going to Stanford. And obviously, I don't want this for him. So why do I want this as a policy? I think that's the next logical step. And I think that's why you being involved in politics has such a huge impact because you humanize the issue in a lot of ways. And anyone like you would.
One of the things that I'm doing right now, I had a couple of people help me with. I filed for a pardon in front of J.B. Pritzker. It was over 2 years ago. I haven't heard anything on it, but I'm not joking here. a lot of people came to me, including a police chief who was running to be sheriff in Peoria, and was like, hey, have you ever considered filing for a pardon? And then when I went to do it, the local sheriff, Brian Asbell, said, wait a minute, you're filing for a pardon? And he backed me on it because he was like, I support this. And one of the things I found is that I make this face and I put it out there because I'm white, I'm clean cut, I'm articulate, I have this Stanford story that people care about, but I'm going to be okay regardless. But what I like is being the story. And like I filed for the pardon because I want to help make people understand that Illinois is getting to a place where if you're ready to move past their past, they're ready to hear you out. And so one of the things that I really try to do when I do things is I'm honestly not doing it just for me, because while I enjoy the intention, I like being on podcasts, I like, people hearing about my story. If it didn't make a difference, I wouldn't do it. Like I could be at Stanford trying to get in good with Peter Thiel and try to get a startup going. But I think about my buddy Shane Crutchfield that's still sitting in prison, got a 40-year sentence for a couple ounces of cocaine. And it's like, I want to humanize him. And he's just not out here right now. So people can't see his face and hear his voice on a podcast. He can't ask Erica Harold, do you agree that I'm losing 25 years of my life for a mistake that I made? And so that's what I try to do. I try to be that thorn in their side, because I watched Bill Black when I was sitting in a day room. He was representative of Danville. I'm sitting in a day room with 10 years left to go on my sentence. See on national news, nobody spends multiple years in prison for cannabis. It just doesn't happen. They don't exist. And I'm sitting there with 10 years left to go. And so I do it now because I want to be that face, and I want to remind people that people like me do exist. And so that's why I do these podcasts and things like that.
Absolutely. And it's an inspiring story. And I know everyone that meets you, not just myself, feels the same way. It doesn't matter what your politics are or what your beliefs are. You've told me stories about meeting Republican politicians, Democrat politicians, and people who have no political biases that are just moved by it.
I don't claim affiliation to any one given party. I call myself a libertarian,
Yeah.
but that's just because that's who I align with most at this time. However, I have nothing against a Republican. I have nothing against a Democrat. Let's talk issues, and I can agree with you on certain issues. The police chief that backed my pardon was a Democrat. The sheriff that backed my pardon was a Republican. I had a state representative, Alan Skillcorn, was a Republican, backed my thing. Like, I worry about getting things done and moving the ball forward. If you focus on party, you're part of the problem.
Exactly. That's what's too bad is I think most people who are kind of burnt out on politics agree with what you just said, and they want to just focus on issues, and they want our elected leaders to just focus on issues. But because they don't, politics become kind of theatrical. Everyday people get burnt out on talking about issues and policy because they think it's broken and it's just not going to happen. I think that's the
Well, I really believe that's why we had the rise of Trump. I really think that's why, because I think Trump was just mainly people's aggression towards the system more than anything.
Totally, yeah. And now we can use that though in a different way, and don't even look at necessarily the Biden versus Trump that conversation you're going to see on cable news, on social media. Use that aggression to do the things you said of like call your state rep or congressman, whoever. Talk to them about actual issues, inform them on issues. You can use that feeling inside of you, that aggression, and use it in a more productive way. That'd be the glass half full way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah. One of the things that like people get so wrapped up in policy that they forget about issues is like Erica Harold. She's a black lady, and she came out as a Republican and said, I support the statement Black Lives Matter, but I don't support the organization Black Lives Matter. I just support that Black and brown communities do face challenges that, others don't. And it's not that, and she got so much criticism for that on Facebook. I couldn't believe it. And I said, here you have a politician that's standing up on her principle, making a gut decision, and you can disagree with her. You can have a different view, but respect to the fact that she's not just going off polls. She's a Republican. Like she was stating her principles. And I wish people would look at things at, is the person being genuine versus is the person just echoing what I want to hear?
Mm-hmm.
Because I will take a genuine person who is seeing something from a different perspective than me over someone who will just retort whatever I say back to them.
Right.
Because like when someone is genuine, they can educate the issues and you can trust that they're going to make the best decision for what they think makes the world best versus someone who's going to make the best decision for their next election.
Absolutely. There's a difference for sure. And you're not going to change people's minds by using that example you just said of attacking her or shouting her down. Like if you actually wanted to change her mind and move her to a different perspective, then you have to have a conversation and engage on the issues and say, she's seeing something different than me. Let's talk about it on any issue. Like that's how you get things solved.
Well, like one of the things Justin Amash just tweeted was something about how like when bills come out, politicians don't even have time to really read them and figure out policies because they're not really worried about policies. They don't worry about what the bill says or how it's actually going to work or how it's going to be impacted. They're worried about the political messaging of what voting for that bill will be.
Totally.
And that's the problem with our polity today.
Totally. Real quick to just kind of to wrap up here, you started from the outset talking about your personal story and what led you here, but just so people know and kind of get the whole picture of everything, what are you doing now in Stanford and like what are you working towards? What are some of your goals with engineering and with graduating from Stanford?
I'm currently studying computer science with an emphasis in artificial intelligence. And I've gotten involved with the Stanford Review as like a contrarian paper, and I've written some papers for them. It was founded by Peter Thiel when he was there at Stanford. I really think he's helped push the ball forward. He was the first outside investor in Facebook. He started up PayPal with Elon Musk. So one of the things that I'm doing at Stanford is I'm inspired by the things that I've seen come out of that school, and I want to be a part of making a good impact in society. And I took a class called CS 182, which was Ethics, Public Policy, and Technology. And currently we have artificial intelligence is on the rise. When you watch Netflix, they suggest particular movies to you based off of your prior selection of movies. That's called data. They look at that data, they find characteristic quantifiers, and they make predictions off of that for which other movies you would like. So what I'm focusing now is I've been toying around with it. I had this statement come to me called "Make Cannabis Not Matter." I figured it was like a good conglomeration of like, you know, how people say "Make America Great Again" and "Black Lives Matter."
Yeah.
So I'd say "Make Cannabis Not Matter." And what I'm trying to do with that is we are currently using artificial intelligence to assess bail qualifications, I think in 49 of 50 states. But the problem is artificial intelligence is not real intelligence. All it is it knows 0 or 1, yes or no. It can't make good, clear distinctions. And so I came up with this thing. If I started thinking about how U of I denied me or admitted me on academic probation due to my conviction, but Stanford accepted me. And it's because a person at Stanford was able to look at it and do a holistic review when Illinois probably had an algorithm that said, check this box, check that box, this is the result. And one of the things I'm worried about is that we as humans have ingrained biasness in us that we don't even comprehend. I was talking about it earlier, maybe it was in a prior thing in this podcast, but in other languages, they have gender neutral pronouns for he and she. Just like in English, how I can say, hey, look at them over there. And you don't know if I'm referring to men or women. But when Google Translate was translating voices or translating languages into English, they realized something, that we had a biasness. We were using artificial intelligence to change one language into English. And in English, we have he and she. And in other languages, their pronoun was gender neutral. But anytime the sentence had the word engineer in it, it would be translated, he is an engineer. If it had the word nurse or teacher in it, it'd be translated, she is a teacher or she is a nurse. But the artificial intelligence isn't some evil thing that's being a sexist robot that says, I don't like women, so women can't be an engineer. It looked at how we talked and made a prediction of which the pronoun it should be. And so one of the fears that I have now is now that we're going to use AI and algorithms in our bail procedures, I'm pretty sure parole boards are going to start taking that into consideration. judges are going to jump at it because it's going to give them a chance to escape the political consequences of having to make a decision. And what I fear is that we're training these algorithms and designing them based off of convictions from the past and other things. And I came up with make cannabis not matter because I want to make cannabis not matter in those algorithms. I want to remove it from our data sets. And the reason I say that is because, yes, cannabis may have been illegal before, but if you look at the trend, we're slowly moving towards it. You are wrong or you're dying tomorrow if it's not legalized within your lifetime. It's one or the other. Like it will be legalized on the federal level here soon. Like, put it this way, most Democrats are upset that their presidential nominee is not in favor of legalization of it.
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't be amazed if Trump comes out in favor of it, just to be like the decisive guy on something. But, to have a contrast with Biden on it. But look, I say that we remove these because as we move forward as a nation and we realize that cannabis shouldn't be illegal and we shouldn't be, holding people back for mistakes that they did, we're encoding all this information into artificial intelligence. And it's not going to be able to make the same distinctions that a human brain can. It's going to build its models off the data you give it. And now the only rational argument that I have heard to keep a conviction in it, I can refute. The rational argument was cannabis might be legal now, but what you're doing was when you sold cannabis, it was illegal then. So at the time, you did something that was illegal. Therefore, it's relevant to the decision process of the artificial intelligence. And I say, if that is true, listen to what your logic has just tied you into. Interracial marriage used to be illegal. So you're telling me that if I apply for a home loan, or if I'm going up for bail and you're assessing my risk to society, that an artificial intelligence should be able to say, you violated the law because you were in an interracial marriage, therefore you're not getting this home loan. I think anybody would say no, but the same logic would apply. It was illegal at the time that you did it. Doesn't matter that it's legal now. So my whole argument is, I want to take the story that I have in my face of being like this, but he's a good guy, we shouldn't hold that against him, and make you realize if you can make that distinction for me, that's great. But an artificial intelligent computer isn't going to connect those dots. So we have to remove the data that's going to embed our biasness on it, because all we're going to do is embed lingering consequences of prohibition, which we no longer agree with. And so that's why I'm coming up with this thing, make cannabis not matter. I already bought the domain, makecannabisnotmatter.com. I'm contemplating if I want to actually do it as a nonprofit or just have the website and raise awareness of it and talk about it. Because I'm not really trying to make any money on it or become a director of a nonprofit. More is have the conversation and make people contemplate, wow, AI could actually determine if you get a home loan or not and decide if using cannabis is relevant. I want people to actually ask themselves if they're okay with that. And I say, make it not matter. So make cannabis not matter.
Absolutely. That's the right answer, because people can decide that it doesn't matter themselves. But if we're going to use AI for it, it's not going to know nuance like that.
Well, Google couldn't figure out why it kept on translating he is an engineer, or she is a nurse.
Right.
Because it was just doing it. They had to research it. Oh, it gets even funnier than that. They trained an artificial intelligence model to find tanks, right? Because they said humans will have to look at a picture forever, and when we're in a war zone, we want a machine just to be able to say, there's a tank over there and save our soldier's life. So they trained it on this thing, and this thing was finding tanks everywhere. They'd show them a picture, big old trees, tank, 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 tank. And then one of the generals like, no, there's not a tank there. And they looked really, really close, and there was a tank. Then what happened? They got out there and took an actual picture of a tank, and couldn't identify it because all the pictures they fed it was in daylight. So all the algorithm did is it said, if there's daylight in the picture, there's a tank there. And so as soon as they took it, and we won't figure out how the answers are working. Artificial intelligence is going to get to the point where we can't even figure out its rationale. We just know that it's working.
Right.
And so that's why it's an artificial intelligence. And so that's why we have to be dutiful servants to make sure as we build these models that we remove anything that would be the worst part of us going into these artificial decisions.
Right.
If we've moved past cannabis being illegal, we need to remove all the residual consequences of it, the same as we've done with interracial marriage.
Real quick then, final thing. Would you say overall you're optimistic, pessimistic, or kind of somewhere in between about where things are on cannabis? Not just, you just said that it'll be, and everyone agrees, legal nationwide in our lifetimes. But you factoring the AI and everything, what is your opinion? Optimistic, pessimistic? Where do you kind of fall on everything altogether?
I'm going to say pessimistic, but I'm only going to say pessimistic because I believe it's a given that it's going to happen in our lifetimes. But I'm pessimistic because it's to the point where it's a joke. Like, we have all these states legalizing it, right? And the federal government has it illegal. And like, we've even passed banking laws on the federal level for them to be able to keep money in the bank. And it's like, I don't understand why we got to be so wishy-washy on it, where it's like it's legal, but it's not legal. And the majority of Americans believe cannabis should be legal. I have no understanding at all how, when we have the presidential debates, if Joe Jorgensen isn't on that stage, there's not going to be a single candidate up there that says, yes, cannabis should be legal. Not going to be one. And that makes me pessimistic because Joe Biden is, I believe he's likely to win in 2020. I don't know that. I'm just saying, and if he gets it, that's 4 years that it's not going to happen. And then his VP, Kamala Harris, my understanding is she's not in favor of legalization of cannabis. And, she has a good chance of being the VP to become the nominee in 4 or 8 years, depending on if Joe Biden can run again. And I'm pessimistic because of that, but I'm optimistic over the span of my lifetime that it'll happen, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
I'm optimistic that the probability of my story repeating for the 19-year-old today that's making dumb decisions has lowered to a great extent, and I'm happy about that.
Absolutely.
But I'm pessimistic because of how far the people are ahead of the politicians on this.
Yeah, and they always are. On every major change, the people are always ahead. The politicians lag, and that's why change takes time. It's because the politicians are the lagging indicator.
Well, I don't blame it when there's a lag, because politicians should be like, I'm going to mess it up. Two of the founders were sitting there talking, and there was a tea on a plate, and they're talking about how the Senate was supposed to be cooled off and slowed down the irrationality of the populace, and the House was to be more representative of like political whims, right? Mm-hmm. But here's what bothers me. So I don't mind when it's a little slow. I mind when it's to the point where it's ridiculous. Like, anybody who knows anything about cannabis knows that it was found on racism. In 1914, on the floor of the Texas Senate, a guy literally got up and said, all Mexicans are crazy and this stuff makes them crazy. And that was the argument for the first prohibition of cannabis. And then we had Nixon come along, and his domestic affairs advisor admitted they used the war on drugs and cannabis to go after the Black Panthers and to sustain the Vietnam War. And so we have this drug that we have openly admitted was based on racism, then used as a criminal thing to solely for political operatives to arrest their opponents and keep the Vietnam War in place. And that was in the 70s. And now it's 2020, and there's still people in prison for it. In Illinois, there's people in prison for cannabis, and it's legal in Illinois. That I owe 200. Take me out of it. I wish it was somebody else. I know other people have huge fines. I can't throw their name out there because it's their story. There's people who have $100,000 in fines for something that's not even illegal in this state, that can't get home loans because they've had it turned into debt collections. That makes me pessimistic. So kind of a mixed ball on it.
No, I got it. And it's complicated like that. But I think, there's definitely going to be momentum on it. And anyone that hears your story and is, even if they're not in agreement with you, I think it's inspiring to hear not only what you've accomplished, but even that you're partially pessimistic and you're still working toward it and you're still going to be working toward making change. So I appreciate you telling your story, and thanks for walking us through it today, Jason.
No, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Joe.